On number 13, we'll start with the prompt, like we always do whenever possible. Which choice describes data from the table that supports the conclusion? So what is the conclusion? Let's start reading. Some models predict that while the total annual precipitation may remain unchanged from the present level, it will become concentrated into fewer but more intense events. These researchers simulated how the amount of water entering the aquifers and the amount used for irrigation would change if this were to occur. They concluded that concentration into fewer events would result in a higher number of dry days, triggering more irrigation. But this change is highly sensitive to the baseline concentration of precipitation that currently exists in an area. So this is another monster tough question, similar to question 11, but not quite as bad as that one. What makes this question tough is that it's really difficult to make sense of how the chart relates to that conclusion. And the conclusion, of course, was this part right here. But as we're going through the process of figuring out how to make sense of all of that, what we can actually realize is that 3 of the answer choices don't make sense. So keep that in mind on some of the toughest of the tough questions. When in doubt, you can go through some of the answer choices and see if there are any inaccuracies according to the table. And so 3 of them have that, and we never actually have to make sense of this difficult sort of stated conclusion here. So let's start looking at these answers. A, if the baseline precipitation is somewhat concentrated, so that's this part right here, that's this whole side, the amount of water being used for irrigation will increase 0.4. Okay, that's okay, for surface, and 0.9 for groundwater, whereas the amount entering aquifers will increase 11%. Well, we can get rid of A because they're comparing apples and oranges. What does it matter if I tell you what happened with somewhat here and then what happened with evenly here? We're not going to really be able to compare those numbers because we're not comparing the same things. We're not comparing the 4.9 to the 11 in this column or the 0.4 to the 9 in that column. We're comparing things that are not even in the same column with one another. So we can get rid of that one. Now let's look at answer choice B. If the baseline precipitation is somewhat concentrated, okay, so that's putting us right here, water used for irrigation will increase only slightly. So the percent change is 0.4. I think that is a slight increase. Whereas it'll increase 9.0 for surface and 7.9 for groundwater if it's evenly. Okay, so far that is correct. And the one thing I might correct about the way I did this is when the statement says water used for irrigation will increase only slightly, I think that actually does include both of these numbers. So you have water use in the surface for irrigation and in the groundwater. Both of those numbers are really small, and they both are increasing only slightly. And we are comparing them to the appropriate numbers in the other row there. So far, we don't have any problem with answer choice B. C, if baseline precipitation is somewhat concentrated, so here we're seeing baseline is somewhat concentrated, that's this whole area here, the amount of water entering the aquifers will increase 4.9%. Okay, that's accurate. While the amount being used for irrigation will increase 0.4%. Okay, for surface, and 0.9 for ground. Okay, great. That's all right, but there's no comparison because going back to the original statement, that's very difficult to understand. We're seeing that the change that they discussed is highly sensitive to the baseline concentration. The baseline concentration is this. So we're looking to see that as you go from this purple part to this red part, there is going to be some change because the conclusion was that whatever is happening is sensitive to the baseline concentration, to the difference between going from purple to red there. So, because answer choice C is only discussing the purple, it's not comparing it to the red. It's not really going to offer us any kind of comparison that would really support or mess up our conclusion. So let's go over to D now. If baseline precipitation is somewhat concentrated, okay, somewhat concentrated, water used for irrigation will decline by a small amount. Water for irrigation will decline by a small amount. That already gets rid of answer choice D because the percent change in water used for irrigation is a positive number. It's a tiny number, but it's not declining. It's on its way up. So the word decline ruins answer choice D. And we have serious problems with A, C, and D. So we can go ahead and confidently pick B here.